the rhyme, one of the most vivid metaphors in the poem is of frost, like recalling Coleridge's Frost at Midnight. The moon illuminates the sea like flakes of frost. So rhyme is a kind of frost. It's a metaphor for a metaphor. The sea is like the rhyme, is like the poem. And as we read, in addition to this kind of fake, stylized, archaic speech, there's this remarkable feature of the gloss along the side. So as we're reading, there's like a active reader reading alongside us and giving us their interpretations of the various stanzas as we go along. So we're reading on these different levels. This, again, irony, this multi-leveled experience, equivocal rather than univocal, multi-voiced form is presented to us concretely. So I was saying it's like the Billy Collins poem, this tension between the dynamism, the magnetism, appeal of metaphor, the compulsion of metaphor on the one hand, the movement, momentum of metaphors and imagery. From the very first word, it is an ancient mariner. What is? Just that pronoun, the use of that pronoun, propels us into a room, into a space, proximity with an it. To read this, we have to imagine ourselves into proximity with this ambiguous it. It's haunting. That's what I mean by the movement of metaphor, figurative language. It is an ancient mariner. That first line is so haunting because it's like in our proximity, something that we can only identify as an it. It's not even a he, it's just a thing, but it needs explanation. It's not creepy. And that's the first thing the gloss writer is like, we need to explain this. This is, this needs a clarification. This, again, haunting effect of literary form. This formal ambiguity, these opacities and gaps in the story and in description. It is an ancient mariner, and he stoppeth one of three. By thy long beard and glittering eye, now wherefore stopp'st thou me? So think about the interpretive work you're going through here. We see the quotation marks, so we infer this is the one of three speaking in the quoted words. But the one demands an explanation too. It's like, why do you stop me? But you're the one that stopped. The bridegroom's doors are opened wide, and I am next of kin. The guests are met, the feast is set. Mayst hear the merry din. There's two different songs going on. There's the rhyme that we're reading, and this is juxtaposed to the song, the merry din, the celebration, the ritual of the wedding. That's really key question, I think, is this juxtaposition of songs, of rituals. One interrupts the other. Family ritual of the wedding. I am next of kin. The feast is set. The merry din. Happy song. Happy feast. It's a ritual of social reproduction, perpetuation of the species, I guess, the reproduction of the next generation. So that's part of what a wedding celebration is. It's kind of the most basic sense of, family purpose, wholesomeness, the purpose of love and regeneration is interrupted in this mysterious, morbid. The wedding is all about an outward display of beauty and wholesomeness and fruitfulness. The mariner isn't even recognizable as a person. He's an it. He's got this kind of decrepit, skinny hand and gray beard. There's a, I think, pregnant disparagement, loon, for a crazy person, but that's also a term for a bird, which will become obviously important in the figure of the albatross. But it's term of derision, dehumanizing. Again, this is, sort of the, perhaps the most iconic, disruptive romantic stranger. All those strangers in Wordsworth that we looked at. This is the one that has registered most in popular consciousness. So it's talking about in a lot of ways, the appeal of romantic poetry, the appeal of the romantic voice, because this stranger is someone we don't understand why we're listening to him. There's every reason to ignore him. He's a figure of social marginalization. And especially in this context of the wedding, the social implications of the disruption are particularly underscored. The official self-celebrating reproduction of the family in the form of the wedding, the next of kin is being kidnapped and compelled into this other communication, this other family, the other sense of society. Look at the way he's kidnapped. First, it's the glittering eye, light long beard and glittering eye. Then his hand, and then it's his voice. He listens like a 3 years child. The mariner hath his will. So that act of listening turns us into children, takes our will away. And we are like the wedding guest here. We become the listeners of the mariner's story. And it's a full body experience, He's kind of teaching us how to listen to the mariner in this first section. It's showing how the wedding guest has been drawn out of his kinship with the wedding ritual and into an embodied attentiveness to the mariner. This mysterious this kind of magical or demonic compulsion, like the woman wailing for her demon lover in Kubla Khan. We have the same kind of responsiveness to this magical mariner's body. It's his eye, his hand, his voice. These are all aspects of his like just being, not his meaning, but just a kind of physical effect of his body itself. The voice is just one more aspect of that. The voice isn't an organ of meaning so much as just one other bodily effect. And consistent with that, another dimension to that is the mariner's lack of narrative causal logic. The mariner story has no clear motive. We're used to the story of he killed the albatross and it hanged on his neck, and that he was guilty for violence against nature. But the mariner doesn't explain actually any motive of hostility to nature. He acts out against nature in an utterly random, spontaneous outburst, much like nutting. This is a companion poem to William Wordsworth's Nutting, where just all of a sudden this violence erupts out of nowhere. These romantic poems preserve the strangeness of, if you want to call it evil, they don't moralize it. It's just something, a radical evil that just happens. So in Nietzsche's terms, he has a book called Beyond Good and Evil. It's without the comfort of being able to moralize about it or put it into a kind of box that explains it away somewhat and comforts us that we can avoid it by doing the right thing. This is something much stranger, and I think maybe much truer to the idea of original sin. It's like this deep propensity that we only evade by pretending we can understand it and avoid it by understanding it. Just happens out of random. And you can see how the gloss writer on the side Yes, it is comically ineptly tries to contain this in a sort of explanatory language. The ancient mariner inhospitably killeth the pious bird of good omen. Like, he's you can tell it doesn't even make sense. Yeah, that was a little bit inhospitable when he shot down the bird. Like, he's overloaded. It's overdetermined with moralistic language. He's trying too hard, we can see, to contain what the rhyme itself leaves uncontained. So the two key kind of narrative mysteries in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, unresolved mysteries, I'm really trying to emphasize. It's important to keep these questions open. Why does he shoot the bird? And why does he bless the snakes? Learn to pray again. And I really want to emphasize that the poem makes totally clear there's no reason. There's a rhyme, but no reason to either event. They happen without narrative explanation. They're radically unexplained causally. We have no intellectual purchase on these events. What we have instead is literary form is used to act them out, to draw us into the sensuous emotional experience of them. Responsiveness to the mariner's body is kind of an analogy, allegory for our susceptibility to radical evil. We feel a sense of echo in the morbidity and disruptiveness of the mariner, to perhaps the disruptiveness and morbidity of our own susceptibility to radical evil. And most remarkable poetry in the rhyme, and the most moving and beautiful. It's very reminiscent of Frost at Midnight, as I mentioned. It tells us a lot about what it means to forgive and welcome the stranger, like welcome what we fear, rather than demonizing it. This is a scene of hell, the infernal torments that the ship undergoes that turn the sea into a kind of boiling cauldron of oils and snakes, the creepy crawly things that terrify the crew and the mariner so much. The mariner learns how to see them in a non-moral way, again, beyond good and evil. And that act of attention, just paying attention again to the body, the strange body of nature, rather than moralizing it as evil, is what liberates the mariner and allows him to pray again. So it's an experience of redemption, but it's remarkably unmoral, and it's without any kind of narrative explanation or moral about how you do it, beyond just paying attention to nature, to the physical material world. You'll see what I mean when I read this. As in Frost at Midnight, it's a astoundingly astonishing, complex physical description. The interplay of light and shadow, and color and language, this sort of rhythm of language that's psychedelic. It's kind of a consuming aesthetic display. It's an experience of paying attention to physical form in nature and literary form as we read, that takes us out of the simplifying strategies of interpreting morals and meaning. The moving moon went up the sky and nowhere did abide. Softly she was going up, and a star or two beside. So already movement, so that nowhere did abide. Moon is always moving. Her beams bemocked the sultry main like April hoarfrost spread. But where the ship's huge shadow lay, the charmed water burnt alway a still and awful red. So you see this contrast between the moonlight reflecting on the sea surface like frost, and this kind of chiaroscuro, just glittering of the waves, the mocking, and then within the shadow of the ship, the color of the sea snakes um, burns away. Beyond the shadow of the ship, I watched the water snakes. They moved in tracks of shiny white, and when they reared, the elfish light fell off in hoary flakes. See how he's drawing us into a richer appreciation of the material world through metaphors? You know, by comparing the water to frost, this impossible thing, it's fantasy. So in a way, he's drawing us away from material realism. He's drawing us more closely into this sensuous experience, the aesthetic or appearance of the sea through these metaphors, even though they are less realistic. Within the shadow of the ship, I watched the rich attire, blue, glossy green, and velvet black. They coiled and swam, and every track was a flash of golden fire. Oh, happy living things, no tongue their beauty might declare. So, again, he's emphasizing this is surreal. I'm talking about what can't be talked about. A spring of love gushed from my heart, and I blessed them unaware. So again, the blessing happens subconsciously, subliminally. It isn't even willful act. Sure, my kind saint took pity on me, and I blessed them unaware. The selfsame moment I could pray, and from my neck so free the albatross fell off and sank like lead into the sea. His redemption occurs entirely unintentionally. Thinking about something else, doing something else, not even really knowing what he's doing, just paying attention to these details in the environment that replace his simplifying moral perspective on events. Just paying attention to nature, all of a sudden, by forgetting the terms of his moral condemnation, he's redeemed, he's morally redeemed. I mentioned how the gloss writer's interpretation of the event of the killing of the albatross, it's both overdetermined and inadequate as an interpretation or explanation. By buttressing the conceit that the universe obeys some cosmic moral caramel order, it's inadequate in that it's resisting this kind of fundamental chaos, fundamental unknowability, the sublimity of the universe that the poem underscores in the moment of the when the albatross falls from the mariner's neck. It's because of a beauty he can't declare just by noticing details of the world. The mariner unintentionally learns to pray again. It's not something he could intend. He doesn't pay attention to the snakes for any moral reason. He doesn't do it to be good. He just notices. He just allows himself to notice. And it happens unaware. What he notices, no tongue can declare. So it's these words, inhospitably pious bird of good omen, they all reinforce this idea that it can be declared, that we can intend it. We can intend to be hospitable. We can be pious. We can put labels on these qualities and virtues and obey them intentionally in our behavior. But the poem itself, I really want to underscore this, displays, I think, the same kind of overdetermination, kind of compulsion to moralize, to tie things up in a neat, moralistic narrative as the gloss writer. At the end, these concluding moral messages, so simplistic. He prayeth well who loveth well both man and bird and beast. He prayeth best who loveth best all things both great and small. I think there's a lot of reason to be real skeptical of this concluding message as a summary or lesson of the poem. Just in terms of the kind of literary economy, was all the weird detail of this poem necessary in order to deliver this message? Isn't the poem rather excessive in comparison with this very simplistic moral message? Was the mariner's problem that he didn't love all things great and small? Doesn't the narrative, in its refusal to ascribe any motive or explanation to the mariner's violence, doesn't the narrative make it very clear that this is not about a failure on the mariner's part, but a much more radical kind of chaos or disorder in the world? And even here, right in the conclusion, the mariner himself says the reason he has to tell the tale is not to impart this simple moral that, you know, it really goes without saying, but it's to relieve this agony, kind of cosmic agony that returns at uncertain hour. Until my ghastly tale is told, this heart within me burns. I pass like night from land to land. I have strange power of speech. That moment that his face I see, I know the man that must hear me. To him my tale I teach. So it's a strange power of speech that he transmits. It's a strange kinship that tells him who needs to hear his tale, and it tells us, perhaps readers, whether we need to hear the tale, whether we're receptive to the strange power of speech. The sensitivity to strangeness, just like the mariner's sensitivity to the strangeness of the snakes, that the poem has to transmit, and that we have to receive or not. The point is the strangeness of the attentiveness to this pain, the burning heart and agony that returns at uncertain hour and refuses calculation or, you know, moralization, rationalization. The agony the mariner faces, he says explicitly, is the sense of a godless universe, being abandoned by God, that God himself scarce seemed there to be. He's faced the prospect of a godless, amoral universe, an empty universe, and by sharing that agony, wants to find a new communion, find a new capacity to walk to the kirk, pray, the goodly company, a new communion on the basis of sharing that agony of awareness of a godless universe. I want to show you about a 10-minute section of a really lovely recent movie called The Sound of Metal, about a heavy metal drummer who goes deaf. He's a recovering addict. He's got his share of agony, and he's acting out disruptively like the mariner. What's lovely about this movie is it's what I'd call its poetry, the way it uses the form of cinema to seduce us into new forms of communication. In this sequence, the main character, Ruben, is in sort of a residential treatment center. It's connected with a school for the deaf. He's struggling with accepting the fact that he's deaf. He's struggling to accept the concept that he needs treatment. So here we see him kind of helping out around the residents as if he weren't a patient. And the counselor here challenges him to just sit down and write. That is, to express himself, put himself down in writing, to put his agony out, to find a speech or an outlet for his burning heart. And I just want you to pay attention to the ways in which he learns to do that. We see him fail at first to write, but then he gradually goes through a series of scenes where we see him learning, inventing means of communicating that are poetic, that have to do with rhythms, inventing rhythms and patterns, finding echoes in the world around him and other people, other kinds of people, children, women, and the environment itself, the rhythms of the environment itself that the movie pays really beautiful attention to, much like a Coleridge poem. And so, like in a romantic poem, it's about learning to write. It's about finding oneself in language, but it's not by finding meanings in language. It's not by finding the correct or adequate meanings, but instead about situating language in this much larger, stranger cosmos of echoes and patterns of social and environmental reverberation.
Oh, hey, Joe.
What was that all about, Ruben?
Oh, your roof? I was fixing your roof. It's like one of the eaves is, I was trying to fix your roof.
You don't need to fix anything here.
Okay.
I've got a little assignment for you, okay? You get up early, right?
Yeah, pretty early, yeah.
I'll have hot coffee waiting for you at 5:30. Early enough for you?
I don't know, I guess.
Okay, 5. And I'll provide a room for you.
What for?
And there's nothing that needs to be accomplished in this room. All I want you to do is just sit. All I ask is if and when you cannot just sit, you turn yourself to the pen and paper that I'm going to supply for you. And I want you to write. Doesn't matter what you write, how you write, whether it's spelled correctly, or if it's just a big mess. I don't care. No one will read it, okay? But I want you to keep writing continuously without stopping until you feel like you can sit again.
Does it have to be writing?
Writing, yes. No drawing. Writing, yes. And if sometime in the future it feels like it's a little bit too difficult for you, you should come and find me. I'll be in my apartment doing the same thing as you, okay, Ruben? I'll be writing too.
Okay. Nice. So fucking stupid. You're so fucking stupid. You fucking idiot. I'm a fucking idiot. No, I thought. Yeah. I thought.
Damn, that's it. All that. Damn.
Another of Wordsworth's masterpieces, There Was a Boy, Like Nutting, She Dwelt Among the Untrodden Ways, the Lucy poems generally, about how our narratives of good and evil, life and death, give these simplifying terms so gratifying to our intellect by making experience comprehensible, but only by reducing them to these very crude kind of categories that don't do justice to our experience. Give way to kind of music of experience itself, you know, like in I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud too. The play of metaphor, the, you know, violet half hidden by a mossy stone, dynamism of the active experience, rather than definite understanding that graphs experience by kind of killing it. We murdering in order to dissect, to understand, as Wordsworth puts it. Here we see again, as in that redemption scene in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, life is a echoing of nature. Like at the beginning of Old Man Traveling, the boy is defined by his environment. The poet speaks to the environment. The environment tells us of the boy. Ye knew him well, ye cliffs and islands of Winander. Notice all the ways in which environment and subject, animal and human, are play off one another in a dialectical way, like we talked about in Blake. The voice of the dove, the music of the air, these human, these personifications are used to estranging effect rather than simply in the way we tend to expect by personification, domesticating the environment. These personifications of natural forms are used in a more radical way to suggest the unresolvable interplay of outside and inside. There is no person except in this kind of endless echoing. Many a time at evening, when the earliest stars began to move along the edges of the hills. So again, this cosmic movement, like we were just seeing, the moving moon in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The horizon is unstable. Things can't get fixed. The stars to move along the edge of the hills, rising or setting. Again, we don't know. It's like, in the ship, we don't know where the points of the compass are exactly. We're in a musical world. Our coordinates are always already in motion. Would he stand alone beneath the trees or by the glimmering lake? We're taking this more local environmental orientation. We're positioned environmentally, half hidden by a stone, by the lake, beneath the trees, and there with fingers interwoven, both hands pressed closely palm to palm and to his mouth, uplifted he as through an instrument blew mimic hootings to the silent owls that they might answer him. And they would shout across the watery vale and shout again responsive to his call. So he hoots to them and they shout back. Shouting, it's what humans do, but he's using that personification to describe what the owls mimicking his mimic hootings. These metaphors of metaphors, like what's the original and what's the imitation is lost in this pattern of back and forth, of echoing. With quivering peals and long halloos and screams, and echoes loud, redoubled and redoubled, concourse wild of jock and din. These terms, jock and din, playful noise, concourse wild, intercourse, interchange, wild interchange. These basic binaries of civilization and savagery, the raw and the cooked. The meanings of these juxtapositions are getting supplanted by the pattern of their doubling. We see an encompassing cosmic rhythm of these perpetual variations on the same, black and white, within the shadow of the ship and in the moonlight. This form of redoubling, whatever meanings get expressed are replaced by the rhythm itself of these endless repetitions. Then there came a pause of silence such as baffled his best skill. Then sometimes in that silence, while he hung listening, this is a great figure, this hanging listening. What am I hanging? What's hanging me? What's this suspended position of receptivity? It's like actively receptive. It's a key attitude of Wordsworth. Listening, a gentle shock of mild surprise. Again, these terms, it's like gentle, what's a gentle shock? Mild surprise. He's using these paradoxes like voluptuous restraint in nutting to tune us up to heighten our attentiveness to subtleties of experience that are crude terms of understanding gloss over. It was carried far into his heart the voice of mountain torrents. The visible scene would enter unawares into his mind. I love these. I mean, what's remarkable, like music, you could notice how little actually is being said. Like visible scene, that's just a tautology, redundancy. It was enter unawares into his mind. What does that even mean? It's like unremembered acts of kindness that he describes in Tintern Abbey. These paradoxes and tautologies, again, are forms of language. He's using language against itself to sort of drain out the meaning, and using the music of these redundant or paradoxical terms to draw our own imagination out, our memories. These endless reflections, visible scene with all its solemn imagery, its rocks, its woods, and that uncertain heaven received into the bosom of the steady lake. So it's like the world is quivering and reverberating visually as well as audibly and narratively. We now realize this is all about a deceased boy whose grave the poet is visiting. So this reverberation of lives, of memory, extends into social relationships or kind of family relationships. And that brings us back to the Ancient Mariner and that kind of social question that's raised by the interruption of the wedding. We're drawn into, just as we're drawn into a family relation with nature, and this echoing, a different kind of family, different kind of human communication is suggested by the poem. By becoming receptive to the mariner, receptive to Wordsworth, the nature that is resuscitated in this memory of the boy's memory. It's like the secret ministry of frost, this underlying web of interaction, empathy, attentiveness, the bird, the nest, the spider, the web, man, friendship. We're bound by this nest or web of echoing patterns, much more expansive than the limiting patterns of the wedding. Next of kin describes this exclusive family bond, whereas the bonds of kinship described in these poems, enacted in these poems, especially by our reading of these poems, are expansive webs that take us out of ourselves rather than reconsolidating a kind of family unity bloodline. Us versus them takes us out and beyond ourselves. In the music of the environment, music of the air, this outside, what we thought was outside, contains rhythm that our very experience itself is participating, that gives us our experience to ourselves.